Until very recently, I used to be dominated by neediness. And yet, despite nothing having changed externally, I learned to leave neediness behind. And so in this video, I'll share all the things I know that have helped me in order to help you break free from neediness as well. Because not only does neediness reduce the likelihood that you reach your goals, it also makes you suffer pointlessly along the way. So it is in everyone's interest to break free from neediness. Because neediness is a big and complex thing, today we'll mainly focus on neediness in the romantic sense. So there's other forms of neediness, we'll touch on that later, but we'll focus on romantic neediness. And that's essentially that you crave a girlfriend, that you crave love, that you crave female attention. That's romantic neediness, what I mean by this. And so the first and most important step to minimize your neediness may surprise you, is to stop using the internet. Let me explain why. So, social media, video games, the news, movies, degenerate music, and especially pornography is designed such that it maximizes engagement. And by maximizing engagement, it basically speaking maximizes negative emotion. Negative emotion means stress, anxiety, frustration, insecurity, impulsivity, and all these different things. The longer you use the internet, the more negative emotion you have. And the more negative emotion you have, the more neediness you have. You have to understand that neediness itself is not real. It's just an expression of negative emotion. And why, you may ask? Well, I don't know. But I will speculate that if you're a baby and you are in negative emotion because you're in pain, because you're hungry or whatever, and cry, that means you express your neediness, your mother helps you, which is good. When you're a happy and peaceful baby, you obviously don't have pain, so you don't need to express neediness. And I suspect that most people, because they never assess anything at all, continue to have that same pattern where they essentially cry, hoping that someone will fix their problems. But that's not the case as an adult. As a matter of fact, if you're an adult, you have to do the exact opposite. You have to take responsibility rather than express neediness. So this is why I think negative emotion and neediness are basically the same thing. And so in order to become less needy, we have to use the internet less. In other words, we need to go outside more. But it goes a lot further beyond that. Let me give you an example. The internet constantly provokes you. The internet provokes you both sexually and non-sexually. It sexually provokes you by showing false relationships, or I meant to say fake relationships. It provokes you by showing bikini pictures. It provokes you by showing degenerate music. It provokes you especially by showing you porn. As a matter of fact, a third of the internet is porn. So to anyone who says you can balance internet use is just delusional, because it's 90% of men these days are addicted to porn. There is no balancing that. It's a massive problem, and it's the reason why neediness is so massive in today's society. It's not like provocation just exists in a vacuum. When you get provoked, you get frustrated when you have no way to achieve the things you want, which in many cases the desires are vastly exaggerated by the internet. If you have no way to fulfill those desires, you get frustrated, and frustration is basically the same thing as negative emotion. So you of course get needier. It's a downward spiral, almost, you could say. You get provoked by the internet, you suffer, so you want to seek more pleasure from the internet, more provocation, and life just spirals downhill. And so not only does the internet provoke you, it also tempts you to indulge. I don't need to explain that. Everyone knows that when you indulge, you are less motivated to do things. And when you indulge in fantasy, the gap between your perception and reality increases, making it more and more difficult to do proper things. Meaning not only do you have less desire to do things, when you do have the desire to do things, you do the wrong things because your worldview is just corrupted by too much indulgence. That means you can use the internet for email, for the map app, to check, I don't know, the weather. You cannot use the internet for entertainment, for relaxation, for indulgence, or for any sorts of degeneracy, because I'm telling you, this will cause 90% of your neediness. I know this because I've been living internet free for basically the last 3 months, and especially in the last 2 weeks I had no internet at all because I moved to a new place and thus had to go to the library in order to access the internet. And obviously then I only do homework and stuff like that. So when you stop using the internet, you will realize how massive of a difference that makes in reducing not only your neediness, but your negative emotion as a whole. I would like to, if you remember just one thing from this video, in order to minimize neediness, you have to maximize positive emotion and you have to minimize negative emotion at the very least. And the largest and most important way to do so is to go outside and to stop using the internet. Now, the second way to minimize romantic neediness is to stop talking about dating. This is quite an interesting rule, I think, but it's a general rule of life that you don't talk to people about your goals if the people are going to ridicule you for them. That means, let me explain. In the year 2024, I talked about dating a lot because I'm very interested in dating. As a result, about half the people I talked to gave me so-called reality checks. And now reality checks in it of itself is a very good thing, but the thing is, those reality checkers had no interest in the truth at all. The most common thing I heard was that I was arrogant for desiring a girlfriend because I'm, quote, barely 1.70 m tall. And I think that's just an absolutely appalling claim to make. Like, I am entitled to a girlfriend despite being 1.70 m tall. Why do these guys have the audacity to argue otherwise? And so, a lot of these reality checkers, they put their insecurities in your mind, trying to make you insecure so that they feel better. And if you respect yourself, you don't listen to such things. Why should you listen to the people who tell you you're too short to date, or you're too short to date in the other sense, or you're this, you're that? It doesn't make anyone better. What is probably what the people should have told me is just try a bit harder and then everything will work out. I didn't need to hear that because I'm 1.70 m, I can't get a girlfriend. That's first of all not true, and second of all, why should I listen to people who obviously have no goodwill for me? Why should I listen to them? It's crazy. And once again, I suspect that people have these false mindsets as because they use the internet so much. Because there's, says the name this ideology where it says that only looks and height and genetics matter. It's called the black pill. The black pill is very, very trending on social media. And so, of course, the people are going to reflect that. And I don't need that in my life. Now, the other half of people who aren't black pilled, that means the other half of people who don't stress genetics, looks, and heights, and so on, are extremely naive. They will instead, like your parents, your female friends, the media, they will tell you that all women are angels. That's clearly not true if you ever observe the world for longer than 10 seconds. And this narrative of women are angels has the problem that it not only creates a power imbalance, where the women are angels and you're not an angel, you're the devil essentially. And the second problem is that it leads to confusion, because when you see that the world is not like this, how it's portrayed by the media, by the parents, by everyone else, you get confused, and confusion itself is negative emotion. So that means when you talk to these pessimistic people who tell you to get tall and get prettier, you get insecure, you get negative emotion, thus you lose. When you talk to the opposite, the ones that tell you that everything is alright, dating is easy, every girl's an angel, you may think that it compensates, but it actually gets worse, because it makes you confused, and so you get more negative emotion. So in both cases, you lose. In the only case where you don't lose when you talk about dating is when you talk to people who can consistently get the girls that you want, or at least once, where they have a girlfriend that you find attractive without it being weird. I hope that's clear. And so, when you talk to those people, they can give you valuable insights. But when you talk to basically everyone else, the rest, the black pillars and the naive ones, you can only lose. And here's the general rule of life. Stop explaining yourself so much. Stop sharing your desires. Do what you want to do, or what you need to do, or what is right to do. Don't try to please the pessimists or the naive ones. Just live your life and stop arguing. Demonstrate that you are right by showing results in your life rather than by arguing. And this is a much more peaceful way to live. Like all of the ideologies aside, this is a very peaceful way to live. You just demonstrate that you are right by living rather than arguing. It took me surprisingly long time to figure that out. But after I did figure that out about, a month ago, I also became a lot less needy in general. I attribute now overcoming neediness to actually first stopping to argue, stopping to explain myself. So it's quite interesting. I don't know whether it's just a coincidence or whether it's causal, but the less you explain yourself, the less you talk about your goals to people who will mock you for your goals, the more peaceful your life gets. The third way to reduce your neediness is to stop praying for a girlfriend. Instead of, why is it wrong to pray for a girlfriend? It's not obvious at all why, so let me tell you. When you pray for a girlfriend, you are externalizing your happiness and thus maximizing negative emotion, but that's beside the point. When you are attached to an external outcome, you are by definition needy. And we don't want to be attached to outcomes, we want to be attached to inputs. And so what are the inputs for dating? There are looks, charisma, exposure, status, a bunch of other things that basically are different manifestations of those things. And so we want to obsess over the inputs. And so instead of praying for a girlfriend, you pray for health, you pray for peace, and you pray for courage. Why those things? Let me tell you. When you pray for health and get healthier and do the proper things to improve your health, you look better as a result. When I eat shitty things, for instance, I get acne, which reduces how attractive I'm perceived. When I sleep poorly, my skin looks very bad also for some reason, so I get less attractive. There are many other examples like this. Probably you know many of them yourself. And so, prioritize health, pray for health, in order to look better. Or rather, not to look better, because that's still attachment to outcome. Just pray for health, and pray for health only, and none of the outcomes. Stop expecting that health will bring you looks. Stop expecting that looks will bring you hot blondes, and things will be better. And now the second thing to pray for is peace. Why peace, you might ask? Well, for one, it's going to make you less desperate. Desperation is also another form of negative emotion, and thus neediness. When you pray for peace, you also act more rationally because you are less desperate, less negative emotion, so you see the world more properly. And what's also interesting is that when you pray for peace, you get more charismatic. 80% of your charisma comes down to how peaceful you are. A lot of people see charisma as this very vague thing. They don't know what charisma is. But charisma is basically how peaceful you are, how powerful you are, how friendly you are. And a lot of those things come down to how peaceful you are. Okay, that may not make much sense, so let's flip it. Someone who's depressed, anxious, and stressed will probably not be perceived as someone who is totally calm. There are no shy and anxious people who are also charismatic. That's what I'm trying to say here. So pray for peace, pray for health. Now the third thing to pray for is courage. Courage will enable you to act on what you know is right, what you know is in God's will, what you know you must do. That means when you pray for health and peace, you get more opportunities. But when you pray for courage, you are more likely to act on those opportunities. So this is the combination of things to pray for instead of praying for a girlfriend. Here's another side benefit. When you don't pray for a girlfriend, but instead pray for these three things, it also becomes much clearer what you should do. And this is amazing, because when you know what to do, you automatically have less negative emotion, because we've already discussed. A lot of negative emotion is caused by not knowing what to do. Not knowing what to do is basically anxiety. And anxiety is a very large part of negative emotion. Now there's also another benefit that happens when you stop praying for a girlfriend, which is that this power imbalance stops being a power imbalance as much. When you have other things that you regard as high, like health, peace, and courage, perspective just gets a lot more, balanced, you could say, but balanced in the sense that you have less delusion. That's what I mean by balanced, not that you start to think like everyone else thinks. And then there's also the principle that the harder you cling on something, the more likely you are to lose it. This is a cosmic principle that's seen basically everywhere all the time. And it also applies here. The harder you try to cling to getting attraction, to getting a girlfriend, the more likely you are to lose it. So stop praying for a girlfriend. Instead, pray for health, peace, and courage. The fourth way to minimize neediness is to maximize your enjoyment of life. As I touched in the previous point, when you obsess over one thing, you are needy. If you are needy in the romantic sense, that means you only find happiness when the hot blondes give you attention. When you are needy for achievements, also known as being prideful or arrogant, you only get joy from others validating you for achievements. When you are addicted to entertainment, only distraction gives you joy, and in every other place you suffer. When you're addicted in general, the things that can give you pleasure are extremely narrow. But when you're enlightened, you could say, everything can give you pleasure. And so we need to, this is what I mentioned in the beginning, is some of the other manifestations of neediness. For instance, pride is needy because what do you mean you can't live without achievements? Entertainment is needy because what do you mean you can't be by yourself? Or addiction is needy because what do you mean you can't not live without that thing? So addiction, pride, entertainment, insecurity, all those things are needy. And so we need to cut them down. And what I encourage you to do is to maximize happiness so that all other forms of neediness go down. Because if all other forms of neediness go down, I would bet that your romantic neediness also declines. And now you may be asking, how do you maximize the enjoyment of your life? Well, I basically know two methods to do so. The first one is to meditate, and to meditate quite a lot actually. I meditate for about an hour a day, and it really, really makes a difference. Second is to pray. If you're needy, you have a hole in you. This hole can only be plugged by God. Third way is to kind of relate it to number one and number two. It's to practice gratitude. Fourth way is to get good sleep so you think rationally. And the fifth way is also to go outside, to socialize properly, to exercise, to see the sun, and to do all those different things that we all already know. So that means the more you meditate, the more you pray, the more you practice gratitude, the more you sleep well, the more you go outside, the less needy you become. You could see this as the positive example of the stop using the internet. Stop using the internet cuts down negative emotion. But we also need to maximize positive emotion so that we minimize neediness in another front as well. And so meditate a lot, pray a lot, practice gratitude, sleep well. You get it. But here's what a lot of people miss. When I say maximize the enjoyment of your life, I do not mean become a degenerate hedonist. When you go on parties, for example, and you don't like going to parties, guess what? You're going to be more needy, not less, despite you having maximized the enjoyment of your life. So this is why maximizing your fulfillment in life is after you break free from the internet. Because if you don't break free from the internet and instead only maximize your enjoyment of life, you may actually get the problem that you start to do things that you don't actually want to do, trying to please society, trying to please the people on the internet, like going on parties, listening to degenerate music, and so on. And so, instead of finding pleasure in narrow and external things, we must strive to find joy in wide and preferably internal things. This will make us, by default, a lot less needy. That also ties back to the happy and peaceful baby that doesn't cry and thus isn't needy. The fifth way of minimizing your neediness is to reduce the perceived gap between you and the hot blondes. You minimize the perceived gap by changing your mindset, essentially. So I have 3 questions I ask myself to remind myself to be less needy. Because neediness isn't like you decide one day you're not needy. You have to constantly remind yourself to not fall into the pattern of neediness. So the first question that I ask myself to reduce the gap between me and the hot blondes: what if she were a guy? Would I still be friends with her? The answer in most cases is no. Because I am only people who have an upward trajectory in their life. People who do not have an upward trajectory can't be friends with me. That's just my rule. The second question that I ask myself is, what if she weren't hot? Would I still desire her? For basically most of my life, I used to be scared to talking to hot girls. This was because I didn't have the mindset that being hot is just being hot. It's not that deep. So by asking myself, what if she weren't hot? Get to defeat that mindset and get to be more courageous. The third question that I ask myself to remind myself to be less needy is this: why do I have to fight to give? It's a very interesting one, I think. When you have this obsession with I need to get a girlfriend, what a lot of people don't understand in this moment is that they actually obsess about giving. They want to obsess to go on dates. They want to obsess about going on vacations. They want to obsess about making small gifts. But actually, it doesn't make any sense to be wanting to be taken from, essentially. So in this sense, the question, why should I fight to give, simply gives me more self-respect. And thus, when I have more self-respect, negative emotion goes down and everything falls into place. Now, I would also like to remind you that there is no such thing as girls being out of your league. This ties back to what if she weren't hot? You see, a lot of girls are very insecure, thus they wear makeup, and a lot of girls want to be loved. Some girls, of course, are so damaged that they don't want to be loved, but generally speaking, all girls are insecure and all girls want to be loved. If that's the case, and if that's also the case that we shouldn't be intimidated by girls being hot, we shouldn't be we shouldn't lower our standards too much, and we also should respect ourselves. All of a sudden, there is barely any mystery left, and we get to approach dating very peacefully. Now, the sixth way to reduce your neediness is to increase your perceived abundance. And there are a couple of ways to do so. The first way is actually a coping technique, you could say. When you are needy, it's probably the case that you are obsessed over a single girl who's not obsessed about you. So you have a crush on a girl. Maybe you've talked to her, maybe not. Maybe she's been at your house, maybe not. But there's something wrong and she doesn't really want you. And that's when the neediness starts in many cases, because you start to fall in love with her, she doesn't. So you get it. And so to remind yourself that other girls exist, I ask myself if I would still be interested in her if I had 10 out of 10s competing for me. When you imagine 10 out of 10s competing for you, all of a sudden the 4 out of 10 who gives you mixed signals no longer becomes relevant. Meaning you act from a place of abundance, which is good. Acting from a place of neediness, as we've discussed in this video, is bad because neediness equals negative emotion equals bad decisions. And now there are 2 more methods that I really like. The first one is to count the opportunities you have. So if you're too scared to talk to girls right now, what I want you to do is to count the opportunities. Count all the girls that you find pretty that you see in the gym, in the park, in the library, and so on. When you do so, you will, in 99 cases out of 100, realize that the girl that you're obsessed over, who's not obsessed about you, who doesn't even like you, it's not that deep. There's so many other girls who want love, who want good things. And then, here's the reason this is kind of this was the final piece of the puzzle for me. It was to start counting the anti-opportunities. What do you mean by counting the anti-opportunities? Well, let me explain. Once I took out a piece of paper, I wrote down all the girls that either wanted me or that I wanted over the past 10 years, and listed whether I would have been happy to be in a relationship with them or not. In about 20 out of 20 cases, I am so glad I didn't date them and instead remained single. When I remind myself how happy I am not to have made a stupid decision driven by lust, I get filled with a lot of gratitude, but also with a lot of courage, because it means I haven't even tried properly. It means there is so much potential left. And this is truly amazing. So let me summarize this video. Neediness is a manifestation of negative emotion. Work on eliminating negative emotion. The best way to do so, from my experience, is to stop using the internet. Now, second, don't talk about goals with people who will mock you for them. Third, stop obsessing about outcomes. Start obsessing over inputs. And fourth, maximize your quality of life to no longer be in neediness and despair. And this is how it's done. This is how it worked for me. You can let me know with an email, I don't read comments, whether it has worked for you or not, because I am genuinely excited to hear it. Maybe give it a few weeks and then write me. And if this video helped you, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.